All right, so we're going to start off with a question. In 2021, I think Michael Saylor, well, maybe there would be some dispute about this. For me, he was the undisputed MVP of Bitcoin. So as we're, I guess, almost 4 months into 2022, who is our Bitcoin MVP so far?
I'm happy to kick it off. I have the same MVP every year. I'm so boring. Satoshi, obviously. But that's like a quite, I guess, easy answer. I would say Elizabeth Stark. Lightning is having an incredible breakout year. And having known Elizabeth for the last 7 years and having worked together on Lightning for the last 7 years, I think a lot of the work Elizabeth and her team at Lightning Labs have been doing and the ecosystem they've built around Lightning has just been incredibly important to bring us to this point. So you're my MVP.
Thank you, Meltem. We've had a lot of adventures together throughout the years and, you know, all of the ups and downs of this magic internet money world. So for me, in 2022, I would say the Human Rights Foundation, including Alex Gladstein, their Chief Strategy Officer, and Yeonmi Park, a board member, North Korean defector, and human rights activists. Because, you know, we hear a lot about number go up in the markets, but Bitcoin has such massive implications for freedom globally, for people living under authoritarian regimes, billions, for human rights use cases. They did a panel in Miami at Bitcoin 2022. Jack Dorsey said it was one of the best panels. Highly recommend checking it out. But their work deserves recognition globally because Bitcoin is really providing people like Yeonmi freedom. And for example, she talked about defectors from North Korea, how access to financial freedom is so key. There are church groups that are helping defectors using Bitcoin and how this technology can really change the face of what's going on there.
Wow, I don't have to go after the Human Rights Foundation.
What do you got, Brett?
It's like go after the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. I would say it's Do Kwon and, you know, his commitment to buying Bitcoin, but more the idea of Bitcoin really being used as collateral. You know, I think that as a broad use case is super exciting. So that's not as good as the Human Rights Foundation, but it's what I got. So there was another conference earlier in the month in Miami, the Bitcoin conference. And while I didn't go, all the scouting reports I got was that it was sort of lightning, lightning, lightning. So Elizabeth, can you give us sort of an update on what's going on with Lightning and why that was sort of the headliner of the conference?
Yeah, as mentioned, it's certainly been a wild ride since first kind of getting involved in this technology 2014, talking to people in 2015, big tech companies telling me what I was doing would never work. I'm insane. Bitcoin is insane, and Lightning is even crazier.
You're still insane, by the way.
I love you, Meltem. And, you know, as it turns out, internet native digital money is really important for the evolution of technology. Why today can I send a photo in any application across the world instantly, interoperably, but to send value is still actually really difficult cross-border, right? So the world is finally waking up to this. And at Bitcoin Miami, there were like tens of thousands of people attending this conference, a lot of builders, developers, people from around the world. We saw a number of major announcements, including Robinhood, BitPay, Kraken had just announced, NCR, which is a major credit card processor, and Jack Mallers is the founder of Strike, enabling Lightning for a lot of major retailers. So that was exciting. We also, at Lightning Labs, are working on a new protocol, which we'll get to, called taro, like the chips, if anybody knows, or the root vegetable, for enabling assets on Bitcoin and Lightning and stablecoins. So people are finally seeing that internet-native digital money really can make a difference globally. And some people say, by the way, they say, well, I don't necessarily want to spend my Bitcoin, right? But maybe that's not as relevant if you have, say, an Amex card. But what if you're living in Venezuela or Argentina or Ghana or Vietnam or the Philippines? There are many people globally for which this is going to be extremely transformative, and it already is today. So I think we're finally seeing this recognition of the fact that having this layer 2 on Bitcoin, enabling it to scale, having these instant high volume transactions are going to pose a threat to the existing legacy players that are not innovating, that have very high fees, and that many people globally don't even have access to. You know, you look at a country like El Salvador that made Bitcoin legal tender, something like 80% of the population has a smartphone, but only 20 to 30% of people have a bank account. people are going to leapfrog the technology, and we're already seeing that today. They don't need the legacy players because they can have something better that's going to be cheaper and that's going to be more interoperable and that's going to give them access.
So I'm sorry, I shifted around because I want to be able to make this sort of a conversation. So full admission, we are investors in Lightning Labs. So we are, a supporter and fan of the vision.
Thank you for your support.
With that disclosure, I have to say that, I'm going to come to you, Meltem. The separation between sort of money and state, I think, is being like Bitcoin's primary mission. Payments increasingly so. So I know you feel passionately that payments are a core, probably a co-equal on that. So can you address why you feel that way?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting narratives we're seeing evolve, and your person of the year for Bitcoin for 2022, Do Kwon, and this idea that Bitcoin is really useful as a store of value. It's the ultimate form of collateral because it settles with finality. It trades in a highly liquid market 24/7, and so it's a great form of collateral. It can be liquidated programmatically, so it dramatically minimizes risk and it can't be double spent. I think one of the challenges with that is if the only thing we do with Bitcoin is buy it and hold it, then there's no incentive for miners to secure the Bitcoin network, right? And that becomes more relevant as the block size reward goes down over time and we become more dependent on transaction fees. Now, arguably, that's going to take a long time. Bitcoin's emissions schedule doesn't cease until 2140, so a lot of time here. But I think one of the really important things is to not just talk about, as Elizabeth said, number go up and holding Bitcoin as collateral and hoping that number go up, but making sure that Bitcoin is actually useful for what it's intended for, which is non-sovereign money, right? That people can hold, that people can custody themselves. And I think in order to do that, we need more functional use cases that highlight why and how Bitcoin is so unique from so many other cryptocurrencies, particularly why Bitcoin's proof of work consensus mechanism is so important. And I think payments and actually spending and seeing the censorship that's happening on other protocols is actually a really important part of highlighting why Bitcoin is such a critical component to enabling financial freedom and minimizing the ability for states in particular, as Elizabeth said, totalitarian regimes to engage in financial censorship, which, by the way, is also becoming more prevalent in Western democracies, right, as we've seen over the last year in particular. So we got to spend it. We got to use it.
Right, and by the way, Bitcoin is going for the decentralized money network effect, and it has it today, right? And we see a number of protocols that are in the decentralized compute side of things. Lynn Alden, macro researcher, a good friend of mine, has written incredible work. She has a great piece on Bitcoin network effects. Highly recommend reading it. She talks about Metcalfe's law and the idea that as the number of users on a network increase, the value of that network increases exponentially. So you have Bitcoin with a network effect for hash power, for security, for liquidity, for value, and for number of users globally for decentralized money, right? So that is a key component. And Meltem and I like to meme.
Yeah, we do.
We create memes on the internet, right? One of my memes was number of people go up because bringing Bitcoin to billions is key. Bitcoin for billions, not billionaires. Not to mean that billionaires can't own it, but the goal should really be to bring this to the entire world and to empower them. The idea that we're solving real problems for real people is one that's really key to me. I think there are a lot of technologies out there that are a solution in search of a problem. Let's think about how to solve problems for businesses, for companies, and for people and humans at the end of the day, which is key here. And then Bitcoin is not just a digital rock, right? People say decentralized gold or digital gold, but Bitcoin is also a monetary network. And if we're not enabling all these really interesting use cases, by the way, we have hundreds of companies building on the Lightning Labs platform, the broader Lightning network. There's a huge amount of developer activity. A lot of it is outside the US. A lot of it is in emerging markets. And that actually enables Bitcoin to become useful, for it to be in people's day-to-day lives. The vast majority of users may not even know they're using Bitcoin in the future, especially with a lot of the new technology we're working on. And that's kind of like the internet, right? How many people know they're using TCP/IP today? Well, we might know because we're a bit geeky, but most of the world does not know that, right? So Bitcoin being the internet of money is really coming to fruition. In many ways, a lot faster than we might have realized. And that enables this Bitcoin monetary network as opposed to merely Bitcoin just sitting in storage as a digital rock that isn't actually useful for people today.
Yeah, and most of that Bitcoin in custody, by the way, is held by a third-party custodian or is held by a smart contract that has maybe a 3 of 5 or 5 of 9 multi-sig. So it's not necessarily moving the arc closer to decentralization, but rather is relying on the same trusted schemes that Bitcoin was sort of designed to avoid.
But people are choosing that, right? So,
sure.
Right?
And there's a spectrum, right? I think one of the things I'm very sensitive to, there's definitely some extreme views out there around how Bitcoin should be used. I don't think it's prescriptive. There's certainly a spectrum, and people are very comfortable with very different models. So for example, my dad is terrified of using a ledger. He finds Bitcoin as a concept to be baffling, and he's a very smart person, but he's never interacted with anything like it before. So for him, he loves having a Gemini account or an FTX account and using it the same way he uses a brokerage account. But the hope is that as we give people better tools and more usable tools, they'll get more and more comfortable utilizing services that push us closer to decentralization and enable people to actually appreciate some of the benefits of self-sovereignty, which is something that many of us, as something I had certainly never thought about because I grew up in the Western world. I've always had access to a bank account, a credit card, but I think as we teach people and give them better tools, hopefully we can start to move the arc of the narrative and people's preferences more towards decentralization and self-sovereignty.
By the way, you have access to a credit card, but today in the United States, people use paper checks, or there's the ACH system that can take, if it's a long weekend, like 3 or 4 days, right? So it's not like we're actually really that far ahead in very developed economies, and it's certainly not interoperable.
Yeah.
Like, being an internet geek, part of what inspired me to work on Bitcoin and Lightning and to start my company was the idea, it seems so obvious to me that you should have a native internet protocol for value, right? The creators of the web in the early 90s envisioned that there would be a way to natively send and receive money online, right? So people know 404, the HTTP error code not found, like you go to a website, it's the wrong page. There's also an error code, HTTP 402, that was payment required. So back then, people thought this would be possible. And it wasn't until Bitcoin that it actually enabled it to be possible. And then, of course, the Lightning Layer 2 aspect that has the instant high volume transactions where you can natively send and receive Bitcoin and soon other assets with Bitcoin underpinning it. So
one of the biggest areas in crypto broadly, which has surprised me, and because I found them boring initially, was stablecoins. And now I've come around and I find it to be a very exciting space. You're enabling Lightning for stablecoins. Can you sort of speak to these sort of technological upgrades that you've teased a little bit? And let's...
Definitely, yeah. So a couple weeks ago, we at Lightning Labs announced a proposal for a new protocol for Bitcoin called Taro. Did you know that Nigeria is the #1 exporter of taro? It's also big in Venezuelan and South American cuisine in Southeast Asia, and my co-founder, Lalu, is Nigerian American, so I actually learned that recently. And it is based on Taproot, which is a recent upgrade to the Bitcoin protocol. So people think, oh, Bitcoin doesn't change, but actually it intentionally has a very different design philosophy than other protocols. You want the base layer to be relatively simple and very stable. And then with Lightning and other technologies, you're able to abstract complexity to higher layers and build on top of that. So the Bitcoin philosophy is something like proceed cautiously and build a secure base layer, and then you can move faster on layer 2 and Lightning. And this is actually bringing the design principles of the internet, something like the TCP/IP, to Bitcoin and Lightning. So based on Taproot, which enables greater privacy and contracting functionalities on Bitcoin, we're using a tree structure to enable assets to be issued on the base Bitcoin layer, and then importantly, you can move it into layer 2. So from our standpoint, stablecoins are a key component of this because there's a lot of demand for it, right? Why should somebody pay 3% plus a 30-cent base fee to send a couple dollars over, say, the existing Visa or MasterCard network? What about cross-border payments? 10, maybe even 20% for very low-value payments when people are sending and receiving that. So the goal with this protocol is, so again, I like to meme, Bitcoinizing the dollar and Bitcoinizing fiat currency. You hear of dollarizing, right? Dollarized economy. Well, we're here to Bitcoinize things. And so we release this protocol to the community. It's a series of technical specifications in a series of what we call Bitcoin improvement proposals. We've gotten feedback from the developer community. We're actively building it out. There's a lot of excitement. And one key component of this is, in terms of the issuance, the assets and stablecoins are issued on the Bitcoin base layer, and you can send and receive like normal Bitcoin. But when you're on layer 2 and Lightning, you're actually routing through Bitcoin liquidity. So you're actually going from like a USD stablecoin to Bitcoin and then back to dollar. And then Bitcoin is underpinning the transactions. So the goal is ultimately you're Bitcoinizing fiat by routing the world's currencies through Bitcoin liquidity. And then Bitcoin, the monetary network over Lightning, is processing these global transactions. And guess what? We can access people, say, in emerging markets that have a mobile phone that aren't in the legacy systems, that are not using, the credit cards of Visa, MasterCard today, but they have a mobile phone. So actually this past week, Morgan Stanley, this is a surprise to me, put out a report saying that Lightning, didn't know they were researching it, always interesting to see what people are doing. They said that Lightning is more practical than debit cards for small volume transactions. So we're seeing this catch on in the broader financial world as well.
Well, and I think the other role that stablecoins play, stablecoins.
Hold on 1 second. I just want to make a point.
Yeah.
I can't believe Morgan Stanley wrote a report on Lightning and didn't talk to you. So while the report was good and I read it, that doesn't seem like deep.
They mentioned our
research.
Announcement, but I think they were just reading online.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
The report was long, I thought, as well. It was like 10 pages long.
Yeah, no, it was. It was actually an excellent report.
Yeah. Kudos to the Morgan Stanley team. They're actually one of the first. Them and Citi started writing about Bitcoin as early as 2016. So they've been fairly open-minded, albeit some of the early coverage maybe wasn't so positive. But I think one of the other things that's really important, the first real interoperability use case for Bitcoin was the creation of Tether, right, which made the banking system or dollars compatible with Bitcoin. It allowed you to settle on the same underlying network, and it was really important to growing the financial market, the capital market that surrounds Bitcoin, and today underpins all of crypto. And today, Tether, right, it might not be 90% of the stablecoin market cap. I think it's closer to 60% right now, but it still comprises 90% of daily stablecoin velocity. It's the most widely utilized stablecoin. The velocity of a Tether is about 1, meaning the Tether market cap turns over once a day, meaning it's really widely utilized in the crypto economy. So I think a lot of people, while we would love to see hyper-Bitcoinization and everyone adopting Bitcoin as their unit of account, I think the reality, a lot of people still index to dollars or euros or pounds. So the ability for people to use these reference rates or index currencies they want to hold, and the fact that someone in Venezuela doesn't need to buy black market dollars but can now access dollars through Bitcoin, I think is incredibly powerful. And again, it brings more people into Bitcoin without them necessarily needing to also adopt the Bitcoin gospel and this belief in Bitcoin that we all have, which again, will take time, but we are fully believers in that. But I think it helps a lot with onboarding as well, which is really important.
Well, in that sense, you have Bitcoin as a store of value and a medium of exchange.
I told him before we started, Elizabeth and I, to start going.
I was going to say you have Bitcoin as a store of value and a medium of exchange, but it may not necessarily be the unit of account, but it's powering all these other transactions. And again, check out Alex Gladstein's work, Human Rights Foundation. He talks a lot about the importance of stablecoins and the ability to have fiat operating over Bitcoin for use cases, say in somewhere like Venezuela, in places that are experiencing hyperinflation, and how the emerging market use cases are really relevant here. Ross Stevens, who's a good friend and one of our investors, likes to say, how many countries can you name in the world, right? And you could probably name like 100. And he says, Bitcoin is for all of the other countries that you cannot name. And I think it's really important to remember that this technology is global and that anybody can access it. And that is really what's so key to the power of it.
So one of the things I worried about last year was that Bitcoin was going to become a partisan issue, right? Because we can be partisan about face masks, like why not crypto and Bitcoin? And it's just been amazing how that issue was turned. And Janet Yellen did an interview with Aaron Ross Sorkin that was just mind-blowing to me in terms of just the shift. And obviously the Biden's executive order was much better than any of us could have hoped. Yeah. That said, yesterday, I guess it was the day before, the New York Assembly, it was yesterday, passed a bill that looks like it's on its way to law, that is a moratorium on Bitcoin mining for a couple of years. So is it a big deal, little deal, no deal?
Massive deal.
Okay.
One of the trends we're seeing, we saw this in the EU as well. There was recently a bill in Europe called MiCA, which is sort of a uniform crypto regulation for the entire Eurozone that included provisions, like a last-minute provision was snuck in around banning proof-of-work mining. And I think the way we're seeing this being positioned, like Bitcoin is an incredibly powerful force. According to NYDIG, they did a recent study, 46 million Americans own cryptocurrencies. That's a huge number. It's a really powerful contingent, and especially younger voters, our generation, who are excluded from the greatest sort of bull run in history, who can't afford to buy homes, who are facing increasing amounts of debt and rapid inflation. Like crypto is a huge part of, I think, how younger voters think about wealth creation. We see a lot of people interested in crypto for this reason. Bitcoin in particular is becoming a huge political issue. Bitcoin is the only protocol today that doesn't have a centralized foundation with known people behind it, right?
We are all Satoshi.
We are all Satoshi. There's no one in Bitcoin.
Except for the person claiming they're actually Satoshi.
He who shall not be named. Look, there are a lot of protocols out there, and they all do different things. But whenever you have people or entities involved, they can be coerced, they can be sanctioned, they can be taxed. They can be made to do things. Politicians like to pick up a phone and call someone and make things happen. You can't do that with Bitcoin. You could call core developers, but core developers write code. The code has to be run by miners. So you could try calling miners, but miners operate in dozens of jurisdictions, and it's not a uniform distribution. There's tons of miners. There's people who mine at home, so you can't attack miners. And then users also dictate what happens to the network, as we saw in 2017 with the block size wars and UASF. And there are millions of Bitcoin users, so no one government or entity can coerce those users.
By the way, highly recommend Jonathan Beer's book, good friend of
on the
ours,
block size wars.
Called The Block Size Wars.
Yeah, he is one of our research associates at CoinShares. But I think we're seeing now from politicians this increasing pressure. Bitcoin is the one thing they can't regulate. It doesn't fit into their existing approach to how they deal with threats, how they deal with new sort of agents that are emerging. And so what we're seeing around the world, which is really concerning to me, is using the attack on proof of work, and in particular Bitcoin's energy usage, as a way to implement a de facto ban on Bitcoin without saying it. So I'm going to go ahead and say the thing you're not supposed to say. I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. That's one thing I like to do. Governments are going to try to ban Bitcoin. They're going to try to attack Bitcoin because it's really difficult to do it otherwise. And I think proof of work is something that's easy to attack. I also think there are a number of protocols in the space who have made it a point, or their selling proposition, to say we are greener than Bitcoin. Our consensus mechanism is better than proof of work because it's greener.
And question, how much of a pre-mine did they have, and how many tokens do they own?
I mean, the thing is, like, consensus mechanisms are not substitutes for one another. I think, again, there's room for a lot of different protocols. A file storage protocol doesn't necessarily need to rely on proof of work because the function you're performing is very different. But I think, again, what's really interesting to me is, like, they're going to start with proof of work, then it's going to be proof of stake. It doesn't stop here, right? And so to me, what I'd love to see the cryptocurrency industry do is, instead of trying to use your consensus mechanism or energy use as a way to attack Bitcoin and try to promote your own coin, and spending millions of dollars on lobbying in the way that Ripple has done, for example, in the United States, which, by the way, in talking to senators and talking to the state legislature in New York, a lot of the information they're getting is from other protocols who are lobbying for this, right?
And it's in their economic incentive to attack Bitcoin.
No, it's not. Actually, I disagree. I'm going to disagree with you. I think we are in the growing pie stage, and maybe 5-10 years from now we can move to let's fucking kill each other stage, but we're not at that stage right now. We want to bring capital into the ecosystem, and I think it's actually very self-defeating. Ripple goes up when Bitcoin goes up. It's statistical. It doesn't take a genius. So I really don't understand what they're doing.
Let's agree to disagree on that one. But I believe there are a lot of actors out there that are intentionally trying to attack Bitcoin because there's no CEO, there's no
there's no
governing body.
Yeah, there's no
exactly.
central entity. But again, I think the really important thing is, for this whole industry to succeed, we need Bitcoin to succeed. Like, Bitcoin proof of work is the underpinning for everything. Without Bitcoin, and Bitcoin as liquidity sink, and Bitcoin as like the ultimate source of liquidity, none of this exists. So I think it's incredibly short-sighted. I'm going to be calling all of my representatives. Also, I'm very tired of a bunch of people on the internet claiming to be Bitcoiners when all they do is talk shit on the internet. Holding Bitcoin and talking shit on the internet is not contributing to Bitcoin. Pick up a phone, write a letter, call someone, like do something.
Write some code. So
Yeah.
I was actually in Miami a couple weeks
Do
ago.
something useful.
And brought the youngest known Bitcoin core developer, contributor, on stage. Her name is Ashana, and she's 14. I met her at the developer meetup in New York with her friend as well, Autumn, who's 17, who does a lot of Bitcoin design. So I will say, though, I interact with so many people in this community, the developers, the people contributing, and they are incredible. It's very global. You don't hear a lot about them, right? There's maybe not as much hype as some other things that are out there, but people are building around the world. I talk to startups all the time. Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Philippines has become this big hotspot. Latin America, not only El Salvador, Brazil, Argentina, Sub-Saharan Africa, there's a huge amount of momentum, Ghana, Nigeria. So this is a global technology, enabling access for those who previously didn't have it. So you might not hear these people on Twitter because a lot of the users don't even speak English, right? And they're not loud on Twitter, but this technology is changing lives. It is improving access to financial services. And I also want to comment on the New York thing because I am a proud New Yorker. I'm from New York. New Yorkers wear a lot of black. And frankly, New York has historically been, the financial capital of the world. We are losing that, as a New Yorker. The BIT license is something that I stood up against when it was proposed. I still believe that has held New York back. I have a lot of things to do on my to-do list, but getting rid of the BIT license is on there right now because it is not making New York a competitive place for, companies to be.
Which, by the way, is why we're in the Bahamas. The Bahamas is a very good place for Bitcoin companies.
States and jurisdictions
Go Bahamas.
will be competitive, right? There's an arbitrage opportunity. You're going to leave a place if it's not going to be friendly to this community and this industry. So with this, moratorium on mining, it's going to bring jobs elsewhere. It's not going to incentivize, people to build in this community. Meltem has done great work around the clean energy aspects of Bitcoin mining. Definitely read her work with CoinShares and the reports she's worked on as well. So New York is going to be left behind because other jurisdictions are going to be more friendly to this industry, which is the future. And one other point around Bitcoin and politics. So we think that this technology is politicized, but for example, there's now a bipartisan bill in the Senate with Cynthia Lummis and Kirsten Gillibrand, so Wyoming and New York, that a number of people have been giving feedback on and they're working on to be very friendly to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And then I also want to give a shout out to my friend Erica Rhodes, who's running against Brad Sherman, who is somebody who has continually criticized Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in Congress. She's a 30-something science teacher who is a pro-Bitcoin candidate, pro-Lightning candidate. She actually accepts donations using Bitcoin and Lightning. She's very involved in the community. She gets weekly briefings on Bitcoin. She spoke in Bitcoin Miami. And we're seeing a new generation of people, across party lines in the US who are running for Congress, who are getting engaged, and who really believe in the future of this technology. So the goal is it shouldn't be a partisan issue. Decentralized money and the freedom that comes along with it is something that hopefully we can all agree upon. Now, there may be some legacy institutions or even governments that want to crack down on this. But ultimately, we are going to win as a community because it is the right thing to happen.
They also can't put us all in jail. That's what I say. They might try, but they won't succeed.
Well, just to tie these two things together, I am an Angelino and a supporter of Erica. And I think we have to, look, there are a lot of rich people at this conference. Let's face it. We need to write checks to congressmen, to senators, to candidates we like. That
There's
is
a lot
why
of great PACs as well that are emerging.
there are PACs. We're in a PAC, but as an individual, there's a.
Oh, and by the way, Erica and many other candidates get charged 4% in credit card fees.
Yeah.
And that's meaningful when you're an upstart candidate trying to run against an incumbent. So with Lightning, she doesn't have any fees, and that's made a sizable difference to her. And she's getting a number of other candidates reaching out to her, and they're like, we want to accept Lightning too. So not only is this relevant, obviously, for the many international use cases and all the new interesting use cases that weren't previously possible around internet money, but it's affecting our political process today. So this is making a real impact for someone like her.
And we're about to have 40 million single issue voters.
Yeah, it's orange versus green, I think, as some folks have said.
No, it's just good politics. Because really, the people who aren't into Bitcoin just don't care. like they're not against it, right? Whereas the people who are for it, you know, like us, are passionate about it, and there are more of us.
And one final point, it's not like, so, you know, we're from the US, it's not like everyone there has access to financial services too. And the ability to have the freedom to, you know, hold Bitcoin, transact in Bitcoin, to not have to, you know, engage in the traditional financial system is something that matters to poor communities, that matters to global communities. It is something that is universally applicable, which is so key to the future of what we're building.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was great. All right.